I'd like to take some time to revisit that .css method that we saw in one of the earlier videos. And so to do that, we're going to take a closer look at a couple of other ways in which we can manipulate elements with jQuery, specifically how we can manipulate element styles with jQuery. jQuery is especially useful at manipulating styles or classes of elements in your HTML. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and create simple h1 here. It says hello world. It's going to be my only h1, so I don't need to give it a class or ID if I want to select it with jQuery easily. And I'm going to create a couple of classes in my main.css. First, I'm going to style my h1 so that it is tomato colored and uppercase. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. All right, there's my h1. Now I'm going to create this class selector in CSS. I'm going to call it new style. And I'm going to give new style a couple of CSS properties and values which will override the properties and values assigned to this h1 already. Okay, things like color, white, and background color, purple, and text transform lowercase. Okay, so if this h1 had this class of new style, it would look completely different. And in fact, let's take a quick look and see exactly what that would look like. There it is. Okay, so that's the h1 with the class of new style. However, I'm going to take that class attribute off. Okay, my h1 has no class. Instead, I'm going to jump into my main.js and I'm going to write some jQuery that will allow us to turn that new style class on and off of this h1. And let's start by doing it with, well, no button. Okay, so let's write the pseudocode. How about when I click on the h1, I want it to change styles. That's my pseudocode. Now let's break it down. That first clause, when I click on the h1. So what is my target? It's going to be the h1. What is the action? Click. When I click on the h1, I want to invoke a function which does stuff. And what is that stuff? I want it to change styles. Well, it is the h1, right? So that's going to be our target again. Same thing. Now, how do we get it to change styles? There is a method in jQuery called toggleClass. It looks like this. And what this method will do is toggle a specific class on and off of an element. You tell it which class to toggle on and off by feeding the name of that class as an argument in these parentheses. So when I click on the h1, I want to toggle the class of new style on and off of the h1. Let's give it a try. So we have h1 with no class. When I click, it changes. Now it has new style. If I click again, it changes back. Let's take a quick look in the inspector. Make sure we know exactly what's going on. Whoop, too far. Okay, there's my h1 there. I'm going to click on it. And now it has a class of new style. Click again. No class. New style. No class. New style. No class. Okay, so we are effectively toggling this class on and off on click. Okay, that's one very, very easy and simple way to affect style changes on your page in reaction to user events. You know how some pages might have different themes for the same content? They might have a day and a night theme, where the day theme, everything is light and the text is dark, and the night theme, the background and all of the colors are very, very dark, and the text is very, very light or white. Well, you could create something like that very, very easily with a button, which, let's try this. Button, when I click on the button, I want the body to toggle the class of dark on and off. Just like that. And let's test this out. Actually, I'm going to create a paragraph with a little dummy text. Okay, there's my paragraph. And I'm going to come into CSS, and I'm going to make sure that the class of dark actually has a meaning. I'll make sure that the background color is dark gray, and we'll make the font color white. Okay, and for the sake of time, I'm going to change this back to the H1. So when I click on the H1, it'll toggle the class of dark on and off of our body element. Okay, so let's test this out. I click on the H1, changes. Changes back, changes. Okay, not only is the background color of the body element changing to a darker color, we can go much darker than that, honestly. Let's try something like that. There we go. Dark theme, light theme, dark theme, light theme, day and night. So it's very easy to implement these site-wide style changes using jQuery like this. And it doesn't have to, we don't have to confine ourselves to one element with one class. I can, at the same time, inside the same click event, also change the class of the H1. So now when I click on the H1, it changes, as does the body and the text, the font color of the paragraph below, black to white. Okay, so we can do this for as many elements as we want. As many elements as we want. Or, let me comment out this second line. We can perform the same function on the same element with multiple classes. So now we're going to toggle the class of dark and the class of new style on and off of the body element when we click on the H1. Now the class of new style doesn't have an effect on the body, but let's see, what can we do? Let's make the font size of that paragraph bigger. There we go. So now both dark and new style are taking effect on the body element. Now last thing, what happens if our body actually starts with a class of dark and we are toggling both the class of dark and the class of new style inside our jQuery? Well, what's going to happen is when I click on the H1, it's going to look at the body element. The browser's going to look at the body element, and it's going to determine what its current class list is. Currently, it's just dark. And then it's going to toggle each one of these values. So it's going to go from body class equals dark, And it's going to say it already has a class of dark, so let's turn that off. And it doesn't have a class of new style, so let's turn that on. And it's effectively, in that way, going to switch the styles between dark and new style, or the classes between dark and new style. So here we have dark. Oop. I have an error. I didn't save. Okay, let's try this again. So we have our body with the dark class on, and then we have our body with the new style class on. It has still toggled both of these classes, but what it has done is turned one class off and one class on. And it is doing that at the same time, in the same function, on the same event. Let's take a look in our inspector and see it in action. So there's our body. We're going to toggle both the class of dark and the class of new style. Okay, so this is a way of actually switching between two styles when your element is starting with one of said classes. You can, of course, if this makes you nervous or if you don't feel confident yet, you can, of course, simply run the same code twice with a different argument each time. This will do the exact same thing, perform the exact same effect, but it's just a little bit more verbose code. And I want to make you aware of the fact that you can add 2 or as many class names as you want as arguments inside this toggleClass method, with each new class separated by a space. Okay. So that's toggleClass. There is, however, that .css method, which we saw a little bit earlier. And that is a way to more directly affect the styles of an element. So let's say when I click on this H1, I want the H1 to change styles again. But this time we're not going to use toggleClass. I want to do the same thing. I want to change the color to white, the background color to purple, and text transform lowercase. I want to make all of those styles take effect. In fact, let's just copy them. I want all of these styles to take effect on the H1 when I click on it. Okay? So what I can do is, once again, my target is my H1, .css, and we saw before, .css takes arguments like this. You can plug in the property you want to change, followed by a comma, and the second argument is going to be the value, background color purple. Let's test that out. There we go. Okay. Let's take a look in our inspector and see exactly how that's happening. It has injected the background color property with a value of purple into the style attribute of this H1. Okay? I click on the H1 and the background color changes. That's how .css is doing its job. However, you might ask yourself, what do we do when we want to inject multiple styles using a .css method? Well, you could write this same line of code 3 times, once for each style, but again, that's a little bit more verbose than you need to be. That would look something like this: color white and text transform lowercase. Okay, and this will work. This will work just fine and do exactly what we need it to do. See? Okay, and if you're okay with that, that's fine. You can stop there for now. However, I want you to work towards making your code a little bit cleaner, a little bit more efficient. So there is a way to incorporate all of these properties and values into one .css method. However, it changes the argument a little bit. Let's do it this way. Whereas when you're only dealing with one style property, you can simply feed in two arguments to .css, the property name and the value, and it will do all the work for you. If, however, you have multiple properties, then what you're actually going to be plugging into these parentheses as an argument is going to be an object. And that object is going to contain one property for every style property you want to change. So in this case, it would look like this. Background color, colon, followed by the value, purple, comma, color, colon, followed by the value, comma, text transform, colon, followed by the value. Just like that. This is an object with three properties. So the syntax is different when you're dealing with multiple CSS properties, multiple style properties that you want to change on a single element using one .css method. Let's make sure that works. There you go. Okay, this does not need to be any more complicated than this. It's simply an object with all the CSS inside a .css method. What usually throws students off is that this is often written on one continuous line, and that's where it starts to look visually confusing. Let me copy this, paste it below. That's when it starts to look something like this. Okay, and when it looks like this, it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that the argument in this method is nothing but a regular old object literal. Okay, so that's .css. I would encourage you all to experiment with .css because it's very powerful and it's a very, very easy way to manipulate styles of